Edisbury earlier when she quoted that passage. And I just want to read what Karwan Jamal Tahir, the Kurdistan Regional Government High Representative in London, said last week, and I quote, "Last June, Daesh captured 1/3 of Iraq overnight and a few months later attacked the Kurdistan region. Swift airstrikes by Britain, America and France and the actions of our own Peshmerga saved us. We now have a border of 650 miles with Daesh. We have pushed them back and recently captured Sinjar. Again, Western airstrikes were vital. But the old border between Iraq and Syria does not exist. Daesh fighters come and go across this fictional boundary." And that is the argument, Mr. Speaker, for treating the two countries as one if we are serious about defeating Daesh. Now, Mr. Speaker, I hope the House will bear with me if I direct my closing remarks to my Labour friends and colleagues on this side of the House. As a party, we have always been defined by our internationalism. We believe we have a responsibility one to another. We never have, and we never should, walk by on the other side of the road. And we are here faced by fascists. Not just their calculated brutality, but their belief that they are superior to every single one of us in this chamber tonight and all of the people that we represent. They hold us in contempt. They hold our values in contempt. They hold our belief in tolerance and decency in contempt. They hold our democracy, the means by which we will make our decision tonight, in contempt. And what we know about fascists is that they need to be defeated. And it is why, as we have heard tonight, socialists and trade unionists and others joined the International Brigade in the 1930s to fight against Franco. It's why this entire House stood up against Hitler and Mussolini. It is why our party has always stood up against the denial of human rights and for justice. And my view, Mr. Speaker, is that we must now confront this evil. It is now time for us to do our bit in Syria. And that is why I ask my colleagues to vote for this motion tonight.
Commonwealth Affairs Secretary Philip Hammond.
Mr. Speaker, I congratulate the Right Honourable Member for Leeds Central on an outstanding exposition of the case for the motion tonight. That will go down as one of the truly great speeches made in this House of Commons. Mr. Speaker, the proposal before the House is clear, it's simple and it's specific. To extend the airstrikes we are already carrying out against ISIL in Iraq across a border they themselves do not recognise into their heartland in Syria. The Prime Minister set out the compelling arguments in favour of taking this action as part of a comprehensive strategy for Syria. In response, the Leader of the Opposition set out his well-known and well-understood principled objections to military intervention, objections he's developed over many years and which are obviously sincerely held. I respect those objections as such, although I believe them to be profoundly misguided. But it's clear, Mr. Speaker, from the Shadow Foreign Secretary's speech, from the speeches of the Right Honourable Member for Derby South, the Right Honourable Member for Kingston upon Hull West, and many other members on the benches opposite, that for many on those benches, The real issue of conscience at stake here is our obligation to act in the best interest of the UK and for the protection of British citizens. And Mr. Speaker, to me, one of the most interesting parts of the Leader of the Opposition speech was his repeated refusal to confirm that it is his party's policy to support the current action in Iraq that this House voted overwhelmingly for in September 2014. Not only is he opposed to extending action to protect Britain against Daesh, but we have to assume from his silence that he wants to roll back the action we are taking now in Iraq to protect the Kurds, the Yazidis and others, and to support the steady erosion of ISIL control by the Iraqi security forces and the Peshmerga. And I ask I ask the party opposite, is that now the position of the Labour Party, despite its long and honourable tradition of fighting what the Right Honourable Member for Leeds Central himself has described as fascism? I hope we will have a confirmation, Mr. Speaker, as soon as possible that the Labour Party remains committed to the current action in Iraq. Mr. Speaker, I won't, I'm afraid, because time is very short. Mr. Speaker, today I believe we have seen this House at its best. 104 members in total have spoken. We've heard forensic analysis and we've heard passionate conviction. I think we can collectively be satisfied that as a House we have done justice to the gravity of the subject we are debating. And with so many contributions and only a few minutes remaining, I hope honourable and right honourable members will forgive me if I don't try to acknowledge them all individually, but I will do my best to try to address the principal themes and questions that have arisen during this debate. And I think one of the key issues that's clearly come out is a need to understand what is the military plan and who is going to deliver it. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, there appears to be some confusion about this. Let me try to clarify it. We are all agreed in this House that airstrikes alone will not finish ISIL. But airstrikes will deliver immediate benefit. They will reduce ISIL's external attack planning capability, making Britain safer, and they will, over time, degrade ISIL and force a change in its behaviour. But they will not alone create a vacuum. And honourable members, during the course of this debate, some of them have sought to have it both ways. Bombing ISIL in Raqqa won't make a difference, and at the same time, bombing ISIL in Raqqa will immediately create a power vacuum. Ultimately, Mr. Speaker, there will need to be a ground assault on Raqqa, supported by continued airstrikes. But as the Right Honourable Lady for Normanton, Castleford and Pontefract observed, that won't come in days or weeks. That will come in months, perhaps even years. That will be before it begins, never mind before it ends. We've had questions about ground forces. Where are the ground forces going to come from? The context of this is a comprehensive strategy, a military track against ISIL and a political track against Assad. And the time for retaking ISIL's heartland in Syria will be when the civil war is ended, a transitional government is in place, and when the world can then once again support the Syrian government, so that the Syrian army, the Syrian opposition forces, the Kurdish forces can turn their guns on ISIL, liberating their own country from this evil organisation, supported by the coalition, with weapons, with training, with technical support, with intelligence and with air power. And Mr. Speaker, much has been made during the course of this debate about the number of opposition fighters available to join in that effort. The number of 70,000 is a number produced by the Joint Intelligence Committee. It is a number corroborated by the evidence of our US allies. But the situation on the ground is complex. There is a spectrum of views included in that 70,000 strong force. Yes, it includes a large element of secularists who have views that we would recognise as democratic. And yes, it also includes Islamists. But there are Islamists in the parliaments of Kuwait and Tunisia. We can work with Islamists who accept the democratic process and are prepared to take part in it. Mr. Speaker, the second issue that has arisen during the course of this debate is a question about the overall strategy. And the Prime Minister was absolutely clear that military action is just one part of a comprehensive strategy. There has to be a political track and there has to be a humanitarian track. And it's clear that we have to pursue the political track in parallel with the military. It is the only way to end the civil war in Syria and bring about the defeat of ISIL. Now we have an international Syria support group, the Vienna process. That is a major change in the context here, bringing together all the major international players behind a common vision of what's needed to end the war. It includes Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, as well as the US, UK, France, Turkey and China. For the first time, all these countries have accepted the need for Syrian-led, Syrian-owned political transition based on the Geneva Principles, a transition that will leave the institutions of the state intact, avoiding the mistakes that were made in Iraq. Now, of course, differences remain between the parties, particularly about how Assad will transition out. But they have agreed together a time frame for political negotiations, including transitional government within 6 months and a new constitution and free and fair elections within 18 months. And, Mr. Speaker, I know that there are those who question the commitment of the United States or the engagement of Russia in this process. So I want, if I may, to quote from a letter that I've received this morning from the United States Secretary of State, John Kerry. He says, "The United States has long believed that while military action can reinforce diplomacy, there can be no military solution to the civil war in Syria. We have to pursue a political track. And at the same time, there can be no political deal with Daesh. They have to be degraded by military force." He goes on to say, Mr. Speaker, that the Vienna process presents the best opportunity in 4 years for an agreement that can establish a ceasefire and create a political process leading to a new constitution and democratic elections. Importantly, he concludes by telling me this: senior Russian officials have helped lead the effort to find a common way forward and have expressed firm commitment to the Geneva Principles. Russian leaders have indicated, both publicly and privately, on numerous occasions, that they are open to a political transition, including a new constitution and elections. Mr. Speaker, the third issue that has come up several times during the course of today has been the question of whether airstrikes will make a difference. The Right Honourable Member for Leeds Central and several other members have made the point that they have been effective in halting the precipitate advance of Daesh in Iraq last year and are now contributing to the erosion of Daesh positions in Iraq. The UK already provides a significant element of the high-precision strike available to the coalition. And that high-precision strike will be vital to the campaign in Raqqa. The Honourable Member for Birmingham Northfield asked about rules of engagement. Rules of engagement are classified, but I can tell him that the UK's rules of engagement are among the most restrictive in the world. And bringing British discipline, British skills and British precision weapons to bear will save lives as we prosecute this campaign. We will minimise civilian casualties. Mr. Speaker, there is no military logic and no moral logic to prosecuting ISIL in Iraq but not targeting its HQ in Syria. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to turn to the fourth issue that has arisen during the course of this debate. Will Britain taking part in airstrikes increase the threat to our security? In 2014, there were 15 ISIL external attack plans. In this year, so far, there have been 150. the scale of this problem is rising exponentially. ISIL already poses a direct threat to the United Kingdom. 30 British tourists killed on the beaches of Tunisia, and what could have been a British plane downed over the deserts of Sinai. 7 different terrorist plots disrupted by the security services in the UK in the last 12 months. The judgment of the Joint Intelligence Committee and the Director General of the Security Service is that the UK is already a top tier of ISIL's target list. They hate us for who we are, not for what we do. We have to be clear that the risks of inaction, as the Right Honourable Lady for Derby South, I think, was the first to say, the risks of inaction are far greater than the risks of action. We have to act now to degrade this threat to our security, and we will do it by targeting their heartland and their control centre. Mr. Speaker, we are not debating tonight, as some would have us believe, whether or not to go to war. 15 months ago, this House voted overwhelmingly to begin airstrikes against ISIL in Iraq. The simple question that we are deciding tonight is whether to extend those operations to tackle ISIL in its heartland in Syria, targeting the head of the snake. This is not a fight that we have chosen. By the atrocities they have committed, by the murderous regime of brutality and terror they've inflicted on the people of Iraq and Syria, and by their clear intent and capability to strike us here in the UK and British citizens abroad, ISIL have made that choice for us. And to answer the question of my right honourable friend for Gainsborough, yes, ISIL do represent a direct and imminent threat to the UK and to British citizens. So the decision tonight is this: do we take the fight to them, or do we wait for them to bring the fight to us? Do we strike them in Syria, or do we wait for them to strike us on the streets of London? What kind of a country would we be if we refused to act in the face of a threat to our security as clear as the one that ISIL poses? Indeed, Mr. Speaker, what kind of a country would we be if we were unmoved by the murder, the rape, the beheadings and the slavery that ISIL imposes on its subjects? And what kind of a country would we be if we ignored the calls for help from our nearest neighbours, even as they grieve for their dead? Mr. Speaker, we cannot contract out responsibility for our national security. We cannot rely on others to take actions to protect our citizens that we are not willing to take ourselves. So, Mr. Speaker, the threat is clear. Our ability to respond to it is undoubted. The moral imperative to act is compelling. The legal case to do so is watertight. We do not propose military action lightly, and we do not propose it in isolation. We will vigorously pursue the Vienna process to ceasefire, transition and a new representative government in Syria. And we will lead the international community in planning and delivering post-conflict reconstruction. But let us tonight give a clear and simple message to our allies, to the enemy and to our brave armed forces who we are asking to do the job for us. Let us show beyond doubt what kind of a country we are by endorsing decisively the motion before us this evening.
Order. I call Mr. John Barron to move Amendment B formally.
To move formally, Mr. Speaker.
Order. The question is that the amendment be made. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no.